There are stories we carry with us from childhood, stories that once felt safe and wondrous, only to grow darker as we revisit them later in life. Peter Pan is one of those stories. The boy who could fly, the boy who fought pirates, the boy who refused to grow old. He seems like a dream every child wishes they could meet. But behind that dream lives something far more haunting. Peter Pan did not begin as a cheerful Disney hero. He began as a fragment of sorrow in the mind of a man who never healed from his own loss. Before Neverland was a place of freedom, before fairies and pirates and shadow-chasing adventures, Peter existed as a strange and unsettling idea, a child frozen in time, untouched by age, unchanged by life, a symbol of innocence trapped so tightly it begins to twist. This first spark of Peter Pan grew from the emotions James Matthew Barrie carried since he was 6 years old, when tragedy first struck his family. From that moment, childhood became something he clung to, something he refused to release, and that longing shaped the story we think we know. But to understand Peter Pan's true nature, we must journey through the original myth. The midnight visit to the darling home, the flight across the stars, the island that feels playful at first and terrifying once you look closely, the lost boys, the pirates, the mermaids, the cruelty hidden beneath the magic. Because when you peel back Disney's soft colors, you find a story built from grief, fear, and a desperate attempt to freeze time. Before we step deeper into the shadow of Neverland, take a breath. Once we cross through the window of the darling nursery, there is no turning back. Long before the world met the mischievous boy in green, Peter Pan appeared in a form that felt far more unsettling. His first incarnation lived inside a lesser-known story called The Little White Bird, and he was not a daring child or a playful trickster. He was a newborn, a magical infant who slipped out of his home before he could walk, before he could talk, before he could even understand the world he was leaving. This early Peter fled to Kensington Gardens, where fairies gathered in the shadows of moonlit trees. He did not grow. He did not change. The book states plainly that he would never celebrate a birthday. He remained 1 week old forever, suspended between life and imagination, trapped in a body too new to remember anything at all. It is a chilling image. Not a child who refuses to grow up, but a child who cannot grow up. This version of Peter was not a hero. He was a symbol of frozen innocence, a quiet reflection of the author's deepest fears and desires, a being touched by time, untouched by responsibility, untouched by the painful changes that shape every human life. Barrie would eventually reshape this haunting idea into an older boy who could fly, laugh, fight, and lead. But the core remained the same: a child preserved, a child unchanging, a child living outside the natural rhythm of life. From this strange beginning, Peter Pan began to evolve. The stage play would shape him. The novel, Peter and Wendy, would deepen him. Disney would soften him. But at the root of it all remains the same disturbing seed, a child who escaped humanity entirely. Before we turn toward the Darling family and the story that shaped generations, remember this truth: Peter Pan was not born from whimsy alone. He was born from longing, pure, painful longing to hold on to a moment that life had already stolen. To understand how the haunting infant from The Little White Bird transformed into the legendary Peter Pan, we step into the home where his story truly begins: the Darling household. A warm London nursery, a window left slightly open, a mother's voice drifting softly through the night as she tells bedtime stories to her children, Wendy, John, and Michael. Unbeknownst to her, someone is listening from the shadows. Night after night, Peter slips through the window, drawn not by mischief, but by something far more fragile. He comes for the stories, the memories, the pieces of family life he can never truly have. He eavesdrops with childlike hunger, trying to grasp tales he will forget the moment he flies away. For a boy without time, memory is sand slipping through his fingers. Everything begins the night Nana, the family's loyal dog, spots Peter sneaking in. She lunges, and in the chaos, Peter's shadow tears free and is trapped inside the nursery. It becomes the thread that pulls him back 1 week later, with Tinkerbell darting angrily behind him. Wendy wakes to the sight of the boy from her story standing in her room, desperately trying to reattach the shadow he lost. She helps him, not knowing this small act will pull her entire life off its path. Peter sees something in Wendy he desperately wants, someone who can tell stories he will forget, someone who can care for the lost boys in ways he never learned how to. He asks her to come with him to Neverland, not out of love, not out of companionship, but because she fits the role he needs filled, mother. Wendy hesitates for only a breath. Then, drawn by curiosity and adventure, she agrees and brings her brothers with her. With a sprinkle of fairy dust and a thought filled with joy, they rise into the sky. The flight to Neverland begins as a dream, London fading beneath them, cold air on their faces, stars drifting closer. But the dream quickly bends. Peter forgets who they are mid-flight. He darts away for long stretches, leaving the children disoriented in a sky without landmarks or sense of time. When he returns, Wendy must remind him again and again where they are going and why. It is the first signal that they are following someone who cannot remember the past long enough to care for the present. Hours pass, maybe days. Time dissolves as if the island is already pulling them in. And finally, through the clouds, Neverland appears, an island of impossible beauty wrapped around a pulse of danger. The moment they descend, the darling children step out of the real world and into the imagination of a boy who never learned the weight of consequences. Neverland greeted Wendy and her brothers with colors brighter than any dream they had imagined. The forest shimmered, the sea glowed, the sky stretched endlessly above them. For a moment, it seemed like the perfect escape, a world built entirely for children, where adventure replaced responsibility and every danger felt like part of a game. But that illusion shattered quickly. The first sign came when Wendy fell from the sky, struck by an arrow the moment they arrived. The Lost Boys had fired it without hesitation. Tinkerbell, burning with jealousy, had told them Peter wanted Wendy dead. The boys obeyed instantly, no questions, no guilt, just blind devotion. When they realized their mistake, they didn't rush to save her. They built a house around her unconscious body, as if covering up their fear with play. When Wendy woke, they surrounded her eagerly, calling her mother before she could even stand. They didn't want Wendy. They wanted what she represented: warmth, rules, comfort, a figure to hold their world together. Neverland began to feel less like a paradise and more like a stage, where every child played a part Peter assigned. Inside the underground hideout, the truth deepened. The tunnels were narrow and twisting, carved into roots older than memory. The entrances were too small for children to fit through as they grew. When the boys became too large, Peter simply adjusted them. No one explained how. The boys never questioned it. In Neverland, imagination didn't just shape the world, it shaped the children. Meals were pretend more often than real. Peter served imaginary feasts with full confidence they were enough, because for him, the line between real and make-believe didn't exist. The boys laughed and played along, swallowing nothing because they were too loyal and too afraid to challenge him. And then came the darkest truth. Lost Boys didn't grow up. When they began to show signs of aging, they simply disappeared from the group. No one spoke about it, no one asked why, but Wendy saw the fear in their eyes when the subject surfaced. Peter tolerated children. He did not tolerate adults. This was not freedom, it was control. A world designed for one child's imagination, not for anyone else's future. Still, Neverland was beautiful. Mermaids shimmered in moonlit lagoons. Fairies whispered through the leaves. Forests pulsed with mystery. Pirates prowled the sea, but every wonder carried a shadow. Every delight carried danger. Even joy in Neverland came with teeth. Peter thrived in this chaos. The Lost Boys survived in it. And Wendy, caught between who she was and who they wanted her to be, saw the silent price of living in a world where time stood still. She began to understand why Neverland felt magical at first and suffocating once you looked closely. If this kind of hidden history speaks to you, stay with us a little longer. Touch the like button before we leave this chapter. It helps our team continue uncovering the stories that were never meant to stay in the dark. At first, Wendy tried to believe Neverland's adventures were harmless, that the strange rules of the island were simply part of its charm. But the deeper she ventured, the more she learned that every wonder carried a shadow, and every shadow carried teeth. Their visit to Mermaid Lagoon shattered any last illusions she still held. The water glittered beautifully, but the mermaids who lounged on the rocks were anything but kind. They splashed Wendy, taunted her, and tried to drag her into the water. Their smiles were sharp, their voices mocking. They were not gentle or graceful. They were predators wrapped in beauty. And Peter, instead of protecting Wendy, treated their cruelty like a game. Neverland taught Wendy quickly. Danger often came disguised as play. But the lagoon held more than mermaids. Out from the fog drifted the Jolly Roger, Captain Hook's ship, massive, dark, and silent. Hook's men had kidnapped Tiger Lily, the chief's daughter, tying her to a rock in the center of the lagoon. When the tide rose, she would drown. Wendy's heart tightened at the sight. Peter's eyes brightened. He darted down the ship with a thrill Wendy didn't recognize as bravery. Slipping into Hook's voice, he shouted commands from the shadows, tricking the pirates into releasing Tiger Lily. Moments later, the real Hook climbed aboard, and a furious clash erupted. Steel rang through the air. The ship shook under their fight. Hook swung with rage. Peter fought with delight. The battle ended with Peter injured, stranded on the very rock meant for Tiger Lily. The tide crept closer, threatening to swallow him. For the first time, Wendy saw fear flicker across his face. But Neverland bent itself around Peter once again. A small bird offered him its nest as a boat. He accepted without question. Reality and imagination merged seamlessly for him, as they always did. When Peter returned to camp, the Lost Boys cheered. Tiger Lily's tribe promised protection, and Michael and John looked at Peter with awe. But Wendy couldn't shake the truth she had witnessed. Peter's world was thrilling because it was dangerous. It was beautiful because it was wild. It was enchanting because nothing felt real, not consequences, not responsibility, not the lives involved. Neverland didn't protect children. It simply reshaped danger into play. And Peter Pan, fearless, reckless, adored, never saw the difference. The turning point arrived quietly. After days of chaotic adventures and nights spent holding the Lost Boys together, Wendy finally told Peter the truth. She and her brothers were ready to go home. She expected confusion, maybe sadness, maybe even understanding. Instead, Peter simply closed his eyes and fell asleep. To him, their desire to leave was not a wound. It was an inconvenience, something he could forget the moment he awoke. While he slept, Wendy gathered her brothers and the Lost Boys who longed for a life beyond the island. She promised them safety. She promised them warmth. She promised them a future that didn't end in a tunnel under a tree. But Neverland listened to everything, and the island rarely let children go without a fight. Before they could even reach the sky, pirates erupted from the shadows. The children were dragged onto the Jolly Roger, bound together as Hook watched with quiet satisfaction. He had waited for this moment for years, not just to defeat Peter Pan, but to destroy everything Peter claimed as his own. Hook announced his plan with cruel delight. The children would walk the plank. Peter would die alone in his hideout when a time bomb exploded. and Neverland would finally be rid of the boy who refused to grow. What Hook didn't know was that Tinker Bell, fiercely jealous, fiercely loyal, had seen everything. She burst into Peter's hideout just in time, throwing herself between him and the explosion. Her tiny body absorbed enough of the blast to save him, and with frantic urgency she told him what Hook had done. Peter soared toward the Jolly Roger with a rage Wendy had never seen in him. On the way, he imitated the ticking of the crocodile, striking fear into the pirates as the sound echoed through the fog. Confusion swept the deck, the perfect opening. Peter slipped into the cabin, freed Wendy, freed the boys, and stepped out onto the deck with a cold, controlled fury that had nothing to do with innocence. The battle was brutal. Pirates clashed with children. Steel scraped across wood. Screams vanished into the sea. The Lost Boys, fighting for their lives, unleashed all the fear they had carried for years. One by one, the pirates fell. Only 2 escaped into the mist, and finally, Peter faced Hook. Their duel crackled with hatred, Hook swinging with desperation, Peter fighting with something disturbingly close to joy. The boy who never grew up moved like a creature without fear, without doubt, without limits. Hook stumbled, Peter pushed harder. In the final moment, Peter forced him overboard. The crocodile was waiting. The water churned. Hook disappeared into the jaws of fate he had dreaded since the day he lost his hand. With the battle over, Peter seized the ship as if it were another toy. Tinker Bell scattered her fairy dust, and the Jolly Roger rose into the sky, transformed into a flying vessel sailing toward London. But even in victory, Peter revealed his truest nature. He raced ahead of the ship, eager to reach the darling home first, not to reunite the children with their parents, but to bar their bedroom window. If the children believed they were unwanted, they would always return to him. Yet when he saw the sorrow on Mr. and Mrs. Darling's faces, the way the mother stood by the window every night, the way the father paced with grief he could not hide, something rare flickered inside him. And for once, Peter let the bars remain unbuilt. The children would go home. They would grow. They would change. Everyone would, except him. London appeared beneath them like a memory waking up after a long, uneasy sleep. Soft rooftops, quiet chimneys, warm light glowing through the windows of homes that still followed the laws of time. For Wendy, Michael, and John, it felt like stepping back into a life they had almost forgotten, one where nights had meaning, mornings arrived gently, and childhood was allowed to move forward instead of looping endlessly. As the Jolly Roger drifted above the Darling residence, the Lost Boys stood at the railing in silence. For so long they had known only caves, tunnels, and makeshift shelters. The sight of an actual home, one with rooms and beds and soft blankets, felt unreal. They didn't remember what it meant to live somewhere safe, somewhere predictable, somewhere human. Wendy placed a steady hand on their shoulders and promised them something Peter never could, that here they would not be forgotten. Here they would be allowed to grow. Here they would finally belong. She stepped through the nursery window with a breath that trembled. The room looked unchanged, as if time had been too gentle to disturb anything. Toys rested exactly where they had been left, beds neatly made, curtains slightly open, but the stillness hid a deeper ache. Her parents were awake. Mrs. Darling stood by the window, hands clasped together, afraid to blink. Mr. Darling paced softly, exhausted by hope. They had waited every night, believing anything was better than accepting their children were truly gone. When Wendy, John, and Michael appeared in the doorway, everything collapsed. Relief, tears, laughter that shook their voices. Arms wrapped so tightly around them it felt as if they were being reconnected to their own lives. The Lost Boys entered hesitantly. They expected fear or rejection, but instead were met with open arms. Mrs. Darling touched their faces the way only a mother could. Mr. Darling welcomed them as if he had always known they were coming. The boys stood stunned, unsure how to respond to love they had not felt in years. Peter hovered outside the window, watching the reunion as if studying a scene from a story he could not join. Home meant something to every child in that room except him. He did not understand what it meant to be missed, to be worried about, to be held. Wendy looked back at him, and in that single glance, she finally understood the truth she had tried to ignore. Peter Pan could fly anywhere in the world, but he could never truly return anywhere. He smiled a small, distant smile that carried neither joy nor sorrow, and turned away from the window. Neverland was calling. The boy who never grew up could not stay in a place where time moved forward. Before he left, Wendy tried to hold on to the connection between them. She promised he could return every spring. She promised there would always be a place for him in her heart. Peter agreed with an enthusiasm that felt sincere in the moment, but already fading in his mind. Inside the Darling house, the lost boys settled into their new lives, their new beds, their new futures. The house felt full again, warm, alive. Outside, Peter rose into the sky and vanished between the stars, free, alone, unchanged. To understand why a story as enchanting as Peter Pan carries such a deep shadow, we have to step out of Neverland and into the life of the man who created it. Because James Matthew Barrie did not simply imagine the boy who never grew up, he spent his entire life haunted by the idea. Barrie's obsession began long before he wrote a single line of Peter Pan's story. When he was 6 years old, tragedy struck his family. His older brother David, the favorite, the golden child, died just 2 days before his 14th birthday. The accident shattered their mother. She withdrew from the world, sinking into a grief so deep that young James tried desperately to comfort her the only way he knew how. He mimicked David's voice, wore his clothes, and stepped silently into the space his brother once filled. Nothing worked, but one thought gave his mother a small, fragile comfort. David would stay a boy forever. That idea, childhood frozen in time, burrowed into Barrie's heart. It became something sacred, something unreachable, something he could not let go of even as he grew into adulthood. Decades later, while walking in Kensington Gardens, Barrie crossed paths with two young brothers, George and Jack Llewellyn Davies. Their playful innocence drew him in instantly. He charmed their nurse, then their parents, and soon became a familiar presence in their lives. The family called him Uncle Jim, and he spent countless hours inventing stories for the boys, weaving them into tales that would eventually inspire Neverland. But his attachment grew unusually intense. He wrote letters dripping with sentiment, especially to young Michael, that felt unsettlingly personal. Nothing criminal was ever proven, but the emotional dependency he placed on those boys was undeniable. He was just telling them stories. He was building his entire emotional world around them. Then tragedy returned. Both parents of the Davies boys died prematurely, leaving their children without guardians. Barrie stepped forward. He had helped transcribe the will and, though what he insisted was a misunderstanding, the document stated the children should go to Jimmy instead of Jenny, their intended caretaker. And so Barrie became their guardian. He paid for their education, raised them, supported them, and remained a central figure in their lives until adulthood. Historians remain divided. Some believe Barrie was a deeply wounded man trying to save others from a loss he never recovered from. Others see his behavior as crossing emotional boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. What is certain is that his fixation on boyhood, on innocence preserved in amber, shaped every page of Peter Pan. Yet, despite the shadows that surrounded his personal life, Barrie left behind one undeniable act of generosity. Before his death in 1937, he donated all rights to Peter Pan to a children's hospital in London. To this day, that single gift continues to fund care for thousands of children, a final gesture that brought real good into the world, born from a story filled with equal parts wonder and sorrow. Barrie created a boy who refused to grow because a part of him never healed past childhood. Understanding him means understanding the tragedy that shaped Peter Pan from the very beginning. Peter Pan's story did not end with the darlings, or with Barrie, or with the first audiences who watched the boy soar across a London stage. Like all myths born from something deeply human, it continued to ripple outward long after its creator was gone. On the surface, the legacy appears bright, a beloved children's tale, a magical boy who could fly, an island where adventure never ends, generations of readers and viewers enchanted by the promise of Neverland. But beneath that bright surface lies something far more complex. Peter Pan became more than a character. He became a symbol of a longing shared by every human being, the wish to hold on to childhood, to innocence, to the brief moment in life when the world feels simple and dreams feel possible. Adults return to the story and find themselves aching for something they can no longer reach, while children see a future they don't yet understand. Yet the darker elements of the myth remain embedded in the original pages. Peter's controlling nature, the lost boy's fear of aging, Neverland's dangerous illusions, a paradise that punishes anyone who tries to grow. Readers who return to the source material find a world far less gentle than Disney's version. They find a leader who manipulates without realizing it, a child who cannot love in a human way, and an island built on imagination and denial. Some see in this a reflection of Barrie's own trauma, his desire to freeze time so that loss could never come again. Others see it as a cautionary tale wrapped in fantasy, a reminder that refusing to grow up does not preserve innocence, it destroys it. And then there is the part of the legacy that belongs not to fiction but to real life. When Barrie gifted the rights to Peter Pan to Great Ormond Street Hospital, he transformed his personal obsession into a force of good. Every adaptation, every performance, every printed edition helped fund care for sick children. The story born from grief became a source of healing, a poetic twist that even Barrie himself might not have expected. Over time, the tale adapted to each new generation. Films softened Peter's cruelty. Stage plays deepened the emotional complexity. Animated versions brightened Neverland's colors while trimming its shadows. Yet the essence never fully disappeared. Youth is precious because it ends. Innocence is beautiful because it fades. Growing up is painful, but remaining frozen is far more dangerous. Modern readers see Peter Pan through two lenses: wonder and warning, fantasy and memory. He represents both who we were and who we can never be again. Neverland remains timeless, but Peter himself carries the weight of that timelessness like a curse, forever laughing, forever flying, forever unchanged. And it is that stillness, more than magic, more than the pirates, more than the fairy dust, that gives the story its lasting power. A reminder that clinging to the past does not protect us, it traps us. There is a moment at the end of the story when the world grows quiet, when the lights dim, the pages stop turning, and the echoes of the tale fall into silence. That is where Peter Pan lives now, caught forever in the pause between childhood and adulthood. We picture him suspended in the sky, smiling, fearless, weightless. But look closer, and the smile changes. Is it joy? Is it loneliness? Or is it the expression of someone who knows he can never move forward, even if he wants to? Peter Pan is trapped in the very thing the rest of us spend our lives trying to remember. He is the dream that cannot grow with us, a symbol carved from longing and grief, shaped by a man who never healed from the brother he lost or the childhood that slipped away too soon. Wendy grew older. The lost boys found homes. London embraced them, letting them step into futures full of change. Time welcomed everyone it touched, everyone except Peter. Neverland remained unchanged. The lagoon still shimmered under the moon. The forests whispered with eternal wind. The pirates lurked in fog that never lifted. And at the center of it all, Peter flew in circles over an island that existed because he refused to grow. There is beauty in that image, and sorrow, because everyone who has ever loved Peter Pan has felt both at once. The child in us admires him, the adult in us mourns him. And perhaps that is the true brilliance of his story. It whispers that growing up is not the end of magic, it is the beginning of choice, of memory, of love, of becoming someone new. Peter Pan has none of those things, not because he is free, but because he is frozen. A soul without a past or a future, a dream caught between one heartbeat and the next. His tale lingers because it forces us to ask the questions we avoid. What happens if we run from time? What happens if we cling to the past? What happens if we refuse to grow? Barrie's life, painful, complicated, unforgettable, gave us a story that exists between wonder and warning. A story that brightens and darkens depending on how old we are and when we read it. A story that still sparks debate and reflection long after the final line. The boy who never grew up will never leave us, not because he lives in Neverland, but because he lives in the memory of who we once were, the version of ourselves that believed anything was possible, before life arrived and asked us to change. If you followed this journey from Peter's first shadow to the final echo of Barrie's life, let the story settle for a moment. Let it stay with you. These tales endure because they reveal truths we rarely say aloud. And if this chapter stirred something quiet inside you, stay close as we step into the next forgotten world. Your small gesture of support helps us uncover the stories that were never meant to stay buried.